Well, Brian, we'll start off with this question. What is the most popular unwise financial decision that you see people make today?
Yeah, so I thought about this one a lot, especially as I was thinking about what types of trends do we see in the financial industry. The number one that's probably the most unpopular that we see pretty often is actually buying property, and typically buying at the wrong times. So Dylan, on average, most people, most families are looking into buying property either like in their early 20s,
Hmm.
mid 20s, oftentimes when their confidence is at the highest, but their
Yeah.
competence financially is at the lowest. Right? They know
Hmm.
the least amount of knowledge that they're ever going to know. And then oftentimes they jump into property more as an independence tool, as a saying, hey, this is my way of getting out of living with parents, and also taking control of my finances. But what they don't go and they don't go research is, okay, can I afford this mortgage?
Hmm.
And when I say afford this mortgage, can I still save? Can I still invest? Can I still donate? Can I still do all these other things? And this is just a part of my life. Have I factored in utilities, home maintenance? What's the interest rate on my mortgage? Um, do I really want to deal with the maintenance?
Yeah.
Dylan, do you like mowing the lawn on your side?
My lawn's not very big, but if it was any
Yeah.
bigger, I wouldn't. And maybe at some point when I get older, I would pay for someone else to do it. But I don't hate it. I don't hate
See,
it.
I'm pretty much the same, right? Like I like it to a degree, especially if you
Yeah.
could do like those zero turn
Right.
lawnmowers. But especially if we got to do push, like I'm okay to not do that and give that task off to somebody
Yeah.
else.
Well, so this is
We don't realize this until we buy the house. It's
right.
like,
So this
hey,
is
all
interesting.
those things we got to do on our own now.
So I want to
So,
ask then, because a lot of people assume I got to buy
yep,
a house as soon as possible.
yep,
Renting is throwing away money.
yep.
Obviously, you're not quite saying that. So when people say that to you, or that assumption, what do you say? Like, I got to buy right away, otherwise I'm wasting my money.
So I think the best way you can answer it, because if you attack somebody's logic immediately with lecturing,
Yeah.
that now becomes an argument, and you're typically going to lose that person. So a lot of times I'll just ask them questions about, well, where's this coming from? How do you think about buying? What have your experiences been? What does this look like? Like what is your actual end goal? And then, okay, well, let me educate you on both sides, right? Renting, owning, pros and cons. And oftentimes you'll find that as people really explore that, especially if they're open to it, because sometimes they're not open to it, there's just not a whole lot you can do to help somebody that's closed minded. But if somebody is open minded, I've had plenty of people that said that they were going to buy homes, really thought about it, and decided, hey, I'm a pretty lazy individual. I don't like taking care of this stuff. I'm okay with renting. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. Lord knows that my wife Megan and I talk up all the time, and we say, I'd probably still be renting if she didn't make us buy a house. Because I'm a guy, when I come home, I put my video games, and that's it. I'm done for
Yeah.
the day. So it's definitely a lot getting used to, cleaning the bathrooms and floors and outside maintenance, and,
Yeah.
and there's a lot as we
Yeah.
build
Just
that.
extra cost too that you don't have to pay for when you're renting. Anything that breaks is up to
Yep.
you. So,
Installing my microwave recently, that's
yeah,
been the
there you
recent
go.
one.
In fact,
So,
yeah, Megan, your wife was telling me the other day that you guys have to like probably replace your front door. There was a
yep.
storm and water got in, and so these all these things. So my question then is, maybe it's this one, it might be someone else. If you could like snap your fingers and make everyone make one decision with their money, just generally speaking, I know everyone's got somewhat unique, but like, what's like the one thing you would have everybody do?
I just, when I think about this, I'm thinking create a plan. Create a plan of action, somewhere to start. A plan doesn't have to be perfect, Dylan, but it serves as a benchmark that we can look at. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? And how is this going to affect other goals? Because we often think about goals, it's silos and singular. I
Hmm.
want to buy a house. I want to retire. I want to pay for my kids' education. I want to donate. But where we often lack forethought is, how does this affect something else? It's like the butterfly
Hmm.
effect.
Yeah.
We don't know what those actions are going to do to our other goals. And creating a plan gives you a bird's eye view to say, okay, let's look at everything. And if buying a house is part of the puzzle, does it fit? Or is this a puzzle piece that's too big? So I'd say that's the one thing that I really wish a lot more people had, because I think we have a lot of times where we build what I call like the back of the napkin type piece when it comes to
Yeah.
finances, where we'll throw a bunch of stuff together and say, hey, we'll figure it out. Something like retirement's a multi-million dollar bill. It is not something you can wake up tomorrow and say, hey, I've retired. That
Right.
is something that you need to have forethought for 10, 15, 20, 30 years in advance to give yourself the opportunity to do it
Yeah.
by the time you're
I,
there.
I'm curious then, obviously as a financial planner advisor, you've seen a lot, educated yourself.
Hmm.
How do you meet with a lot of people? What's the
Yes.
balance between like, obviously hearing maybe your clients' desires, dreams themselves, but
Hmm.
also trying to point them to making wise decisions that they may or may not understand.
Yeah.
How have you found the most effective way to do that? As someone saying, "Hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z with my money," but then not knowing that, like, well, in order to do that, here's what we got to do. So how do you like kind
Hmm.
of guide people? Because at the end of the day, it is their money to do what's best for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's two parts of this, which is prioritization and helping support when it comes to the decisions that they make. So my favorite phrase, and everybody we work with, it drives them crazy when I say this, is saying, hey, there are many times I am not going to agree with your decision making. In
Mm.
fact, I may tell you that you're making a bad decision, but I'm going to support you.
Mm.
It's like the father concept of, you've got a child, they probably shouldn't touch the stove. They're gonna touch the stove at some point, but
Yeah.
you got to support them and you got to take care of them after they touch the stove. It's really the same thing when it comes to money. Is sometimes as unfortunate as it sounds, you got to let some people make the mistakes because they have
Yeah.
to feel it. They have to feel it one time to realize they touched the stove and they don't like how the stove feels, and they'd rather go back to what actually works. So there are quite a few people we'll connect with that we may have a hard time
Mm.
getting them to a point to realize what they're actually trying to accomplish until they start making mistakes.
Yeah.
And once they make mistakes, oftentimes there's one of two groups. There's the folks that'll never figure it out, and there's nothing you can do to help them. And there's the folks that will say, dang it, Brian, you were right about that piece. I'm so glad we talked about this because I learned the hard way. Now I can go spread that education to my own
Yeah.
kids, to my own
Yeah.
grandkids, and help them not make the same mistakes that I did. And there's some mistakes that are just going to happen. I couldn't tell you how many times I've eaten out or taken on bills that I'm a certified financial planner. I'm human just like anybody else.
Yeah.
But it's how we react and learn from our mistakes and then prioritizing.
Yeah.
If,
Speaking of
if we're talking
mistakes,
about,
yeah,
oh, go ahead.
keep going.
Yeah,
Keep
yeah,
going.
go
No,
ahead.
keep going.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, I think about the concept of buying a car, for example,
Mm.
right? If we're thinking about buying a car, the primary piece, what does a car need to do, Dylan? What's the number one thing a car has to do?
I'm guessing it's take me from point A to point B.
Bingo,
Okay.
right? How nice the car looks is entirely up to your preference. What the car
Yeah.
does, is it V8, is it V6, is it a Tesla, all those types of pieces. And so if you're going to say, I'm going to buy the Tesla, it's important to know that you're saying no to something else. You just don't know what that other thing is yet,
Mm.
right? Whether that's, hey, you don't have as much money for the engagement ring that you want to buy. Instead of buying a $10,000 one, maybe you're buying a $2,000 one. Not right or wrong, it's just prioritizing on the importance list because our spending is a direct correlation of what our priorities are.
Yeah.
Direct correlation. I
Yeah.
learned that from a wise soul.
That's right. um, Speaking of mistakes, and I know it does depend on the person, but maybe generally speaking, or like the one you see the most on, like what is
Mhm.
the one thing that you typically advise people to do that you get the most pushback on from the average person?
Yeah, so I actually think there's two parts of this. One, definitely any planning regarding insurance,
Mm.
life insurance, disability insurance, long-term care, like anything that protects a risk, because that risk is unseeable in somebody's mind.
Yeah.
That tends to be a really big challenge because nobody wakes up and says, "Hey, I'm going to get disabled tomorrow."
Yeah.
Me being a person that, my wife has a ton of health issues. My aunt's been has had MS since she was 30. She hasn't been able to walk without a wheelchair for the last 30 years.
Mm.
I hear that and it drives me crazy. How can you not plan for this scenario? We see it every single day, but everybody has different reactions to it. And the second, and this one's really controversial, it's actually advice from somebody's internal circle. Think about it. The number two most trustworthy
Mm.
relationships we have are often either our spouse or our parents.
Yeah.
Challenge is, our parents have different financial goals, dreams, aspirations than we do. And so the advice they can typically give is either something they were taught by a financial planner themselves, they were taught on YouTube or wherever they find information, or it is based off of their own specific experience.
Yeah.
Challenge is they're a different person with different priorities. And so oftentimes, while the advice is well intended, it can often massively miss the mark. And that's where a lot of family issues can come into the fold, because there can be a significant amount of resentment if that person listens to family advice and then all of a sudden the plan doesn't go the right direction.
Yeah.
Well, now they're reflecting on this and saying, do my parents really know what they're talking about and really what they're doing? And some parents give fantastic advice. I've seen some questionable ones out there too.
Yeah.
We're all well intended, but certainly not the way we would suggest it.
Yeah. And so I'm curious. So get, family, friends, close inner circles telling you one thing that probably maybe is not the best. It's hard to turn that down. What do you do if you're advising a married couple and they're not on the same page, like even themselves? How do you get them to, like, I don't know. I mean, the stereotype is like one's a spender, one's a saver. How do you get them to be aligned on goals, when they're far apart? What do you do? What have you seen that has worked?
So, Dylan, I'll refer to some of your work on this. Is I think both of our roles have some degree of being a personal therapist on the line. Is that we certainly involve ourselves on conflict resolution. Mm-hmm. And I think the first thing is asking questions, because there has to be an openness to solve the problem. Both parties have to agree that there is something inherently different between us, and we're all on the same team. We're all on the same team. We're all trying to accomplish the same goal. So oftentimes where we see some of the struggles with spouses is they try to convince me as the advisor that their way is right and their spouse's way is wrong. And that ultimately tries to alienate me in that conversation is one side or the other. And so as an advisor, it's so important to stay neutral and make sure each person is heard. So if I'm asking a husband questions or a wife questions or same-sex couple or whoever I'm talking to, it's so important to specifically address that person, pause, and address the other person. It sounds simple, but it is so uniquely important, especially if both people want to be involved with the finances themselves. And then from there is actually making a lot of finances a fun game. I think that is a under-talked about piece, is the psychology of how we think about money. So typically a spender, I call it the carrot on the stick analogy. They like to have something to look forward to constantly, right? Because when they think about saving, the immediate piece in their mind is, what can I be using this money on right now? I don't know if I want to wait 2 years, 4 years, 6 years from now to use it at another point in time. So setting different specific goals of fun things they can do along the way is, hey, we just need to save this. If you do this, this will allow you to take a vacation in March. Do you want to do that? That is a really fun way to get that type of person motivated. Yeah. And for the savings person, it's ultimately always bringing them back to the plan and helping them realize and helping think through some of the savings component. Because Dylan, contrary to common belief, there is a problem with oversaving.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Because there's no guarantee that we are going to make it to tomorrow or to any of these future aspirations. So the saver can really struggle to see reasons to use the money today. And so empowering them oftentimes with data to back things up, right? A lot of math, and saying, hey, if we spend this money today, you're still going to be okay. Yeah. You're still going to be okay. So I like to address both parties, but also you want to address both personalities psychologically on what's going to motivate them. Yep. When it comes to making decisions.
It's interesting. I am not a financial planner. However, and what I do a lot of premarital counseling. And so we always talk about money, and always money, it's like the saver is like yes, and the spender is like no. And I always like when it comes to budgeting, here's how I put it. I think it's good for both people. Obviously the spender needs to make some wise decisions, but the saver, you need to spend some of your money. Otherwise, you don't need to be miserable what you're doing. And so, that's really helpful. I'm curious about this. What is one of the most popular things that people think about money or finances that is not true?
There's so many things.
Or a few, or a few.
My goodness. So I would say one even simpler is just that there's a black and white answer to everything. When it comes to money management, it really is so gray. So one concept I've seen a lot, and it's a story that, I mean, you'll see it on TikTok, Google, YouTube, everywhere, is that go for the highest rate of return possible, right? 10%, 12%, 15%. But what they don't take the time to research is what is the risk level that's needed for this. So it's a concept called standard deviation. That's just a big, math phrase for how much can the money go up or down depending on the risk that you're taking. So if you're talking about an investment that has a 10% rate of return potential, that might have a 30% standard deviation, meaning it could go up to 40%, it can go down 20 or 30% itself. And so if you take a 5-year stretch, and you can do the math on this, it's actually really fun to do it. If you take a 10% rate of return and you only have 1 year, just 1 year, that you go down by 10%, after 5 years, you would have actually had more money if you would have just gone for a 6% rate of return and gone steady Eddie.
Yeah.
You would have more money even though you get a lower rate of return. So I think that's one challenge that a lot of folks have a hard time grasping because it is so contrary to the concept of how they think about money. But the second piece is that we need to have dollars in specific buckets for specific goals that have different risk tolerances, because it's okay to go for the gold and go for the 30% rate of return. So we use a concept a lot with clients where we talk about safe money, aggressive money, and home run money. So your home run money might be you're starting a business, right? It could catapult to the moon, Dylan.
Yeah.
It could totally hit the tubes tomorrow, and it's bankrupt. It's over. Your safe money is not super cool. It's your money that's going to go up every single year. It's consistent. I call it's like the mailman, right? The mailman's going to come every single day, over and over and over again. And your aggressive stuff is kind of like riding the roller coaster, right? Roller coaster's high, roller coaster's low, and we know that we're going to get to the end at some point, and the end will come. But the end doesn't necessarily tell the emotions of the in-between, right?
Yeah.
So COVID, let's talk about COVID for a second. Dylan, did you get a chance to look at your own investment accounts during COVID? What that looks like? March of 2020?
Honestly just didn't really look at them because I knew that this was probably not going to be a fun time. So I didn't really look at them.
Yeah,
You tell me if that was wise or not. You tell me if that was wise or not, but I ignored them.
I'd say that's pretty fair and wise, especially because we need to understand as humans how we think about our own money.
Yeah.
Because we can talk about this stuff logically all the time, but it's another to be emotionally talking about this and feeling this in the moment. So if you had $1 million in an account in March of 2020, depending on what you're invested in, that money might have gone down to $700,000 in like a week.
Yeah.
In a week, 1 week, 7 days. I mean,
I don't quite have $1 million, so sure. That's why I didn't have anything to look at. So
I mean, regardless of the size, though, nobody likes to see money go down, right? Warren Buffett's got a great quote where he talks about, you always need to be going up when it comes to your money. There's a lot more of the quote, but it's I think it's like always grow your money, and then step 2 is refer back to step 1 when it comes to wealth. Coincidentally, though, if you just ignored it, right, do what you did, Dylan, looked at that same account in December of 2020, good chance that $1 million would have recovered from $700,000 to $1.2 million. Because there was a huge 50, 60, 70% hike when it came to stocks recovering as people had less concerns economically with COVID. And that's what that aggressive bucket is. And so having the right amount of money in each bucket is so critical, and most people just they have all their money in one spot. But they when you have initial forethought to understand what your risk tolerance is, and you have the right money in the right pockets for the right reasons, you use your money at the right times. When the stock market isn't doing so well, you probably want to pull from your safe money. When the stock market's doing really, really well, you feel really, really good about selling some stock.
Yeah.
And that's where I think people really struggle to understand that, because it means that you're giving up rate of return.
Yep.
For more money.
Yeah.
But I'd rather have a higher amount of money than a higher rate of return.
Yeah. That's helpful. Now, you mentioned emotions. I want to talk about this for a second. For those that care, I last year read a book called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. It's so good. It was so good. And he talks about emotions. I'm curious, your perspective on it as well. You've already mentioned, like, money is not just logical. Sometimes doing the less logical thing, I guess in some cases, could be better because you feel better about it. How do you kind of put those two things together. They kind of, this is what's like logically the best, but obviously how you feel about it matters. How do you go about it? I don't know, employing or involving your emotions or your clients' emotions in their financial decisions.
So it's funny you mentioned that book. I actually have it sitting on my desk at home. Love that book. Really good read. Please write down Psychology of Money for anybody that's listening to that, because worth the time. But when it comes to this, I'm a math person at heart first. So for me, the math has to be where it starts, right? Because if the math doesn't math, it doesn't matter what the emotions ultimately do at the end of the day. The plan will not work. But then when it comes to the emotions, it's understanding how you're going to react in those situations depending on the circumstance. So there's plenty of clients that we talk about with real estate, but my wife and I, Megan, have decided at this point, like, we're not super interested in buying real estate properties. Not anything to do with it being a good investment, not anything to do with it being a bad investment, not anything to do with the actual property itself. I just know my personality. When I come home, I'm not thinking about wanting to go manage a property. When I'm on a Saturday, the last thing I'm thinking about is going to fix up a door. And for others, that might be a priority to them. And therefore, the money is worth the time and the effort that they spend. And so I think the emotions part of it is thinking about what is my time worth and what do I want to spend my time doing? Whether it's money related or it's in a completely different priority. And sometimes it's okay to give up money for time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, I think like sometimes on Twitter or X, people will talk about, they got this much money. Should they pay off their mortgage or should they invest it? And everyone's like going to argue back and forth. Like if I was in a situation, you tell me if this is right or wrong. If I was in a situation and someone was going to present me the amount of money that would pay off my mortgage, and they're like, you can do whatever you want with it, but you either have to spend it, save it, whatever. It's probably not logical. The idea of like paying off my house feels very good to me. Mm-hmm. I know it might not be the best. I'm sure you could invest it and make a higher rate of return or whatever, but it feels like I would just love that. What would you recommend in a situation like that?
Yeah, so this one depends on the person for sure, because I've definitely had the conversation on both sides, but what you're describing is a really natural feeling, because when we think about the concept of mortgage, it feels like a burden, right? It's this monthly bill, and it's often the largest monthly bill on our entire budget. The challenge, and this is what I'll often ask folks to help them realize whether or not that's the right decision, is thinking about what comes next after the mortgage, right? So let's say you did actually pay this off. What would you do with that money? Where would you send it? Would you save it? Would you invest it? Would you find something else to spend it on? Without a plan, guess what most people do, Dylan?
Yeah, just spend it.
They find some other way to spend the money. So they just replace the mortgage with another expense, and you're doing the exact same thing, right? Yeah. So I think you definitely have to relate to the person, because the right type of person, that will make sense for, especially if they're a very, very intentional person and they can plan proactively, have forethought, and understand that as soon as this bill is gone, that means that we can now prioritize doing something else with this wealth. For many others, we're definitely looking at the math side of this too, though. I'd probably have a much different answer if somebody has a 7% mortgage rate than a 2% mortgage rate. Yeah. A 2% mortgage rate is pretty much like a dinosaur at this point. I mean, I get pretty giddy even seeing those these days, because they don't come up very often. So that could be a very hard conversation to get somebody to sell a house with a 2% mortgage.
Yeah.
But in this circumstance, it is much more of a leverage conversation too. Because when we think about a house, there's really only two ways that we can access money from a house once the money's in the house. Because the house is part of our overall plan. It's either one, we'd have to sell the house, which would require a big, significant move on our family landscape if we wanted to access any money from it. Or two, we could maybe take out like a line of credit or a loan. Some folks are okay with that, some folks aren't, because that on the emotional side, some people have a really hard time borrowing from their house. Others, it's a little bit more natural. So when you help break that down for folks, the answer essentially normally presents itself on where is this person actually going to lend to.
Yeah.
But I could definitely see the enticement of paying off the house. It definitely feels like a huge burden lifted off the shoulder, especially if it's a big part of your overall budget.
Now, you talked a little bit ago about rate of return, percentage, and risk. To timestamp this for people, because things can change all the time. We're recording this in September of 2024. Yeah. Crypto had a heyday. Seems like it kind of wasn't as popular and as now as it was maybe a few years ago. What is your perspective on it? It seemed like that was like the thing to do. I mean, especially when you're talking about the numbers, a very high possibility of success. Or I should say success of something good happening, but obviously a possibility of not good things happening. But it doesn't seem to be as big of a thing as it was maybe 2 years ago. So how should we view that right now?
Yeah, so crypto is an interesting one. So like legally, just so everybody's aware, like I cannot make formal recommendations on like whether to or to not invest in cryptocurrency. There isn't a ton of research on it. It's a relatively like new product in comparison to most other things that exist out there, like an individual company, an ETF, an indexed fund, a mutual fund, a lot of these household names that people think about when it comes to investments. But when we think about cryptocurrency, it's impossible to ignore, right? It's everywhere. Dylan, how many athletes have you seen marketing cryptocurrency in the past?
Well, I'll tell you what.
years?
Before sports gambling took over the world this year,
Yeah.
it was all crypto, and I feel like now it's all sports betting. But
Tom
yes,
Brady,
yeah,
all these other folks that are having these commercials, right?
Yeah.
And some of it works, and some of it did not work out.
You speaking
so well.
of, so for those that do know sports, Rob Gronkowski. No, it was Tom Brady because it was Rob Gronkowski was making fun of Tom Brady. Tied in.
Oh, yeah,
how
yeah,
Tom
yeah.
Brady lost tons of money.
Yeah.
In crypto. So
This is the part when it comes to risk, right? So like educate most people on what cryptocurrency is. The best description of it at this point, if we're talking about that home run, aggressive, safe, it's definitely in the home run bucket. It can shoot to the moon and it can shoot to the floor, really at any given time, because cryptocurrency is a virtual decentralization of currency. It's not necessarily a product. Like you're not making something. It's not a chair that you sit in or a microphone that you're utilizing. It's a concept.
Yep.
And so when you're betting on a concept, you're betting on if that concept is going to be relatively well received by the public or perhaps not as positively received by the public. In cryptocurrency, there's a lot of scams out there. It's probably one of the most scammed products at this point. So my encouragement for people, do your research, ask questions, ask an expert. Most experts can't recommend whether or not you actually invest in it, but they can at least help you walk through the pros and cons of if you decided to make this decision, now you're very, very informed in doing so. But there's certainly some clients that it's made some sense for, especially as part of their home run bucket, that they may want to consider.
yeah, that's helpful. Now, speaking of being successful, I want to take a detour here a little bit and just talk about like you personally and the success you've had and kind of how you made that happen. So you graduated NC State. You've been at Northwestern, I think,
Back.
since then. And, you're probably not going to, you don't have to say, but you've won lots of awards, especially in how long you've been with with the company and all the stuff you're doing, really successful. As you look back on maybe your last 5 years, graduation to where you are now, if you were to say, hey, in 5 years, or when you say, when I graduated college, Brian, you're going to be here in 2024, would you have believed it? And like, how have you gotten to where you are in your career today?
Yeah, so there's a lot we could dive into. I'm going to try to compress this the best that I can. But if you ever talk to my parents about this exact same theory and even some of my internal friend group, they'll say that we saw a lot of this coming, but like nobody's seen what this could have essentially turned into at this time. And very grateful for all the support and people that we've had along the way that helped us get there. But I think I was like 6 years old and I told my parents I was going to live in North Carolina. Didn't really know much about North Carolina back then. Had been there a couple of times, vacations, but I said, man, this place is awesome. Weather's great, food's good, fun things to do. Why am I up here in Indiana? Nothing against my Indiana people, by the way, in case anybody's listening. But you know what those winters are like. They're brutal. They're awful. And so at that time, that was my mission. I needed to figure out some way to get to North Carolina. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. But that's the type of personality that I've pretty much been my whole life. I set something that I want to accomplish, and it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's when. And so especially in creating the financial planner career, I got a lot of influence from my own family situation. So most people don't know about me is that my grandfather and grandmother had a very successful flower growing business. My grandfather actually sold flowers to Ronald Reagan.
Oh, wow.
Pretty cool. So they actually had like a signed, autographed piece in their house, and when he got dementia and Alzheimer's, which I'll refer to in a moment, he threw it out. So we've not been able to find that yet. Hoping the U.S. government ever helps us in locating, but that would be pretty cool. So he was sick for about 10 years in dealing through this, which is about 5 times the average length of a long-term care scenario. If anybody has gone through that, it's stressful, it's emotional, and it's certainly financially costly.
Yeah.
We weren't working with anybody. Nobody in our family trusted anybody to talk about money. It was the class. Our financial plan was put money under the mattress, put money in the walls, money in savings accounts. Like, it was all over the place. And my grandfather, because back then families were a lot more traditional, mostly males controlling the money and dominating the conversation. My grandma didn't know anything about money, let alone what a savings checking account, what any of that stuff was. And we had just an awesome experience with a team that went above and beyond. I'm not talking about goals and money. I'm talking about they drove over 2 hours to come see our family at our home and spent like half the day with my grandmother, brought cake. Like, if you ask anybody in our family, that was one of the coolest things ever. It had nothing to do with financial planning. It had everything to do with being a good person. And seeing that experience, and these advisors just so happened to be through Northwestern Mutual, so I knew this was somewhere that I wanted to pursue. I wanted to create that. I wanted to create that experience where somebody felt like they could have that intimate of a relationship with somebody. Like, you can't drive Dylan 2.5 hours to see every single client, right?
Right.
But you want to have that kind of relationship with somebody where they're that vulnerable, that you're talking about everything about their situation and helping be their guide and their partner along the way. Like, I wanted to be that advisor that's getting invited to their wedding, their kids' birthdays, like the fun things in their life, and that I'm not just their professional, I'm their friend. And so I think a lot of the success that we've had is simple. We care a lot about people, sometimes to a fault. I am that advisor that I will call you 6 times if you need to do something and you have not done it, over and over and over again. And so with Northwestern, it's been a blessing, the partnership that we've had with them. They've had plenty of great services that help our clients. And like any company, they've got faults and pieces that are challenges. But what I've really enjoyed about Northwestern is they always get it right. It may take some time. It may take some time to make updates, but they've got super cool things they're doing. Like, they just came out with a texting app. We've never been able to text clients financial information my entire career. And to be able to implement that, be able to do business on Instagram, we could never do that before either.
Yeah.
Really, really cool. So I'd say that's a good bit about the career of what we've done, and just a lot of resilience and a lot of help from other people in building that and helping us build it.
So it's pretty cool. I don't know. I mean, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming in the time that you've been at Northwestern, you've probably been one of the most successful people from start to where you are and how long you've been there. And one of the things I really respect you for is, like, really successful at what you do, really good at what you do, but you, like, really care. And so one of my questions I have is, are financial advisors scary? So there's a lot of stuff out there. People talk about how really they're just trying to help you for the kickback that they can get. Or then you have the commercials of, like, we don't take commissions and they take commissions. And so, like, from the average observer, it's super confusing. And I think even to what your family was going through with your grandparents, like, you just kind of, in the beginning, like, can we trust anybody? Does anyone care for us, or they just want our money? Yep. So for people who are like, I want help, but I'm super confused and kind of distrustful, how would you recommend going about finding a good advisor? Or how would you just talk about the industry in general, where people are kind of hesitant, thinking advisors are only in it for themselves?
Yeah, this is such a great question, because there's so many layers to it when it comes to actual financial metrics of, like, how advisors are paid, different people, and I use the storyline of, regardless of profession, whether it's medical, financial, it doesn't matter what it is, there's going to be a lot of great people. There's going to be some bad apples. Now, I choose to believe that there are way more good apples than bad. But everybody has their own opinion and what they deem as a good apple or a bad apple when it comes to planning. So when it comes to certain things to look for, especially as you're interviewing a team, you're thinking about talking with somebody, my encouragement for you is, first, have an intro call. Get to know the actual person on the other side of the phone. Ask them the hard questions. One of my favorite questions I get asked immediately are, what do you do with your own money? How many people are you helping? exactly how much does this cost, and what questions should I be asking that I don't know?
Yeah.
Those are my favorite questions to get asked, because an interview with a financial planner is an interview on both sides. The advisor is trying to figure out if they are a good fit for you. The client's trying to figure out, is this somebody I can trust and that I want to see for the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years of my life, or however long you keep that partnership going. So I think specific questions can be really, really helpful, asking about qualities. And I think there is somewhat of a sense of, you can tell very quickly whether or not somebody actually cares. So I think there's two types of listening skills, Dylan. There's listening to respond, and there's listening to understand.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between that. But to answer your question on like the scary concept, yeah, there's certainly some rough material out there. Advisors get paid, y'all, in really one of three ways. They can either get paid commissions on products, fees on accounts, or just a straight fee for time. But no way of getting paid is right or wrong. It's just important that you as the client know how this advisor gets paid, or if you forget, that you have the trust and faith that you can call this person at any time and they will non-judgmentally answer that question. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw this funny video. I think it was last week. This guy is this made up video, but this guy walks in his client and he's like yelling at his financial advisor for all these things. And he's like, my portfolio has skyrocketed by like $1 million the past year, all these things. And he's like looking at his report, but you took $250. Like, what are you doing with my money? And the guy's trying to explain, well, no, I didn't take it. That's the standard fee for like selling or trading, whatever. And the guy's like so mad. It's like he made all this money and he's like, this is like, you're just trying to get rich off of me. I thought that was pretty funny.
No,
I'm curious.
I do have a point. I do have a point on this though. To that point, because I think a lot of people have a hard understanding what an advisor's job is to do, like a real financial planner, what their actual job is to do. Because a financial planner's job is not to get you the highest rate of return on your portfolio. It's a big misconception out there. Now, granted, that's certainly a part of the puzzle to make sure that based off your risk tolerance that your portfolio is doing what you need to accomplish your goals. But your advisor's job is to help you hit objectives. If you say that something is extremely important to you and that you want to hit it at this time, that's what your advisor is there for, is to help you think through the paths. Because there's multiple paths to the goal, but what's the most effective and efficient path for your situation? That's the most critical part of an advisor's job. Because there's so many things that advisors do, especially like really great ones, that they never get paid for. Never.
Yeah.
It's they're helping you fix beneficiaries on your accounts. We just had that conversation with a client yesterday. They've had a couple of retirement accounts for 4 years. Said, hey, we're going to log in real quick. We're going to change the way this is getting taxed. But I also want to check a setting real quick to make sure you guys put beneficiaries on them. No beneficiaries on the accounts. If we had never had a conversation, that may never have happened.
So what happens? What happens if there's no beneficiary?
Well, it would go through the probate system at that point.
Okay.
So there would be a legal proceeding, and then the courts would essentially decide who gets the money. And that's the challenge, right? Do the courts make the right decision or not?
Yeah.
I've had one client that their 401k was in cash for over a decade. They had no idea how to invest it. I had another client that was investing their 401k with after-tax dollars, which means that they were going to get taxed twice. They were going to get taxed up front and get taxed at the end, and they had no idea that they were doing that and that it wasn't appropriate for their plan. So I think about those case scenarios is that a great advisor is going to be there to coach you, to help you hit objectives, but also a great advisor is going to have the ability to challenge you when they know you're making a mistake.
Yep.
That's a part too. Because if an advisor can save you from making a mistake, you never would have stopped that mistake on your own. Or if you would have, it might have been too late. We often assume that we as people, and I think this goes for any profession, that we would just be able to figure out the problem. Well, if we don't even know that the problem exists, how can we solve a problem that we don't know exists in our plan? Right. Yeah. And that's where I think the really great advisors stand out.
So speaking of mistakes, you look at it's like every year that it gets worse and worse. Like the average American savings account, no one saves or whatever. Why don't most people save enough, in your experience?
2 reasons. Two reasons, Dylan. Lack of specific direction on where to put money for their goals, and lack of perspective of why they should do it. Those are at the simplistic side of this, the two most important reasons that people do not hit goals is they're often confused on how to actually hit the objective. And if they're confused, they either don't take any action at all or they take the wrong path. And second is the why factor. Well, why wouldn't I just spend all the money that I get? Dylan, saving money is very unnatural. Very unnatural. Do you think back in the 1500s when they were in Europe, they were that concerned about saving a bunch of wealth? I mean, some people maybe, but I feel like most people were just, hey, I just need to figure out how to eat tomorrow.
Yeah.
Does a dog worry about saving money? Absolutely not. A dog just worries about, where do I sleep? Where do I go to the bathroom? Where do I eat today?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where I really think it's super important when you're creating a plan. And when you have that plan, you will naturally save more. The most consistent savers are not typically the ones that get the highest rate of return. They're the ones that are saving every paycheck, every month, every year, over and over and over and over again. And the compounding effect is different because they've built that muscle. Because as you save more, that allows you to spend more too. Because now you can spend much more intentionally because you know that you're doing everything that you need to for your future financial goals.
Yeah.
That allows you to have a lot more peace when you're spending, where you're not second guessing that big purchase. You've planned for it, you're ready, now it's time to take action.
On the flip side, how do you know if you're saving enough? Because it sounds like, you could be so nervous of wanting to have every possible thing that could ever happen covered. How do you know if you're saving enough?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to run this, right? I mean, you can build a comprehensive financial plan and actually like work back the math backwards based off your goals, what you're trying to accomplish, and say, okay, let me put this all in a plan and have this data actually shoot this out to me. But there are some good rules of thumb too, depending on your age, where you're at, what you should be doing. So if you're starting in your 20s and you're saving 20 to 25% of your wealth, you are in a fantastic position. That means the other 75% of what you bring in, you can spend on whatever you want. Now, depending on your financial goals, if you've got the goal to retire at, let's just say, 40 years old, you may need to save 50 to 60% of your wealth to do that. Yeah. That's because you have a much shorter time horizon to hit the goal. But similarly, and I've had this conversation with some folks too, if you really, really love what you do, assuming you are healthy enough, you may not need to actually save as much money. You may want to save more money, but you may not have to. The challenge is that's the one unknown factor is how much can we control our health?
Right.
We can't.
Yep.
And so having the proper plan in place so that even if you have health situations happen, you're still going to be okay is a good piece alongside of that, especially if you're intentionally going to save less.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're saving 20 to 25%, especially early on, you're in a great space. And then from there is just working the exact math backwards to see, okay, is that enough or is that too much when it comes to what I'm trying to accomplish?
I don't know if you have one that you haven't really talked about yet, but give me a financial hot take that you have. Maybe not something that you think is necessarily a hot take. You might think it's wise, but the average person might disagree with or be surprised to hear you say.
I think the parents one for sure is almost always a hard take because that can be a really tough conversation to challenge the logic and the conviction of somebody in your internal household. I think from this side, I'll even take it from a hot take perspective of where people get information from. Most people get information from Google, YouTube, TikTok, and a lot of these types of platforms.
Yeah.
Challenge is that information is static. It doesn't change. It's based off of when it was created at the time, and oftentimes is meant to hit a mass audience, not a specific situation.
Yeah.
And so most of these platforms, they aren't certified financial planners. They don't have insurance licenses. They don't have investment licenses. In fact, it'd be no different than if you went to the campfire and talked to your friends about money. Doesn't mean the advice can't be helpful,
right?
But is it potentially detrimental? Absolutely. I had one client that that watched a YouTube video and wanted to completely throw out our entire financial plan that we had built over 5 years. Now, fortunately, we helped recover that situation to really save that, but it took a lot of convincing. It took probably 4 or 5, 6 meetings worth of helping somebody realize that, hey, remember, in the asterisks, this YouTube video says that this person gets paid a commission for giving you this advice. And also, this person is not a person that knows who you are. They have no idea who you are, or even that you're listening to the video. And it's not that the advice is bad, it's just not the advice that you should be listening to for your situation. So we look a lot more towards academia, big institutions, universities, folks that spend time for a living doing this stuff. Because imagine, Dylan, going up to your doctor on the day of surgery. Imagine this for a moment, right? So nobody questions this. Imagine on the day of surgery, you go up to the surgeon and say, I don't want to do this surgery. I instead want you to do it this way. I saw it on YouTube.
Yeah.
How would the surgeon react?
Yeah. They wouldn't listen. Or they can say, you can go get surgery somewhere else.
Or you can go take your business somewhere else. But we often, when it comes to money, we immediately jump to the conclusion that, oh, my advisor must be bad, or this person must not know what they're talking about. My encouragement for folks is take some time, figure out where these resources are coming from, and then ultimately it is your money. Make your decision. Yeah. For better or for worse, we often justify our decision making, whether it was correct or not.
So I know, again, all of this is really situation specific. Yeah. But how do you balance something like spending, like this is like a real example for me and our family. We've got kids, and obviously they're only getting older. How do you balance something like spending on experiences for your kids, because you can't get that window of time back, with saving and planning for the future? Especially where it's like, you don't know how healthy you are going to be or how long you're going to work, and you might not have a lot of discretionary income, but like you want to do this because you can't do it 20 years from now when you might, quote unquote, could afford it. If that makes sense. How do you balance stuff like that?
Yeah, intentionality is a huge piece of this. I don't inherently think that every single person needs to be 100% covered for their financial plan. Lord knows I have plenty of clients that are not 100% covered. But what I do believe is that people need to be educated on what their actions have created. So especially if somebody has a budget and that's what they're ultimately affording, there are multiple options to solve the problem if you're wanting to hit all the goals. Well, you can go find ways to make more money, income-wise, or this might be a reduction in expenses elsewhere. Hey, if we're going to prioritize these experiences, do you really need the Tesla? Is the Tesla that important to be able to do it? Yep. Because oftentimes people jump to immediately decreasing what they save to be able to plan for the experiences. And although that is certainly a viable option, it's the easy out. It's the easiest thing because it's, I'll save more later, I'll invest more later, we'll figure it out. It's the classic concept of, I'm going to do that task tomorrow, right? When tomorrow never comes. Yeah. And so when you're planning intentionally, and Megan and I do this a good bit with our own finances, we talk to a lot of clients, is envision what experiences actually mean. Do they require money? Sometimes they don't even require money. I know at least me as a child, I could care less whether or not my dad spent $10,000 or $1. I didn't even know what money was when I was 6 years old. But what I did care about is that my dad was there. Yeah. And my mom was there. And when we had different experiences, they were always there all the time. And it was almost embarrassing. I'm sure you had this too, but they were everywhere. All the time. And I couldn't get rid of them. But those experiences, being at all my football games, being at my basketball games, doing the little things with me, doing arts and crafts at 8 p.m. at night. One of my favorite memories of my family, and for any of our Indiana people, you'll know this too, is getting Christmas trees right after Thanksgiving time to make the Christmas tree. And so we would go out in the Indiana cold. It'd be like negative 10 degrees out there, Dylan. Yeah. And we're all freezing our butts off, cutting this tree down. And we get the tree, it'd be this huge tree, it'd be this whole debacle of going inside. And we get the tree up and we start hanging all the ornaments. And then we all sit down after the ornaments are done and we have hot chocolate and we're just hanging as a family. You can't get those experiences back, right? Yeah. So we often jump to the conclusion that throw money at experiences, and while that's a part of it, help ask yourself, what do my experiences look like? And then let the money do its thing. Yeah. Whether that's you saving on a per check basis into an account that is specifically set aside for the experiences, or even that you're finding alternatives of different ways to experience a similar want, which is having that togetherness, but perhaps doesn't require a lot of wealth to fund it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. The irony, of course, of asking this question is we always said by the time Finley, our oldest daughter, was 10, we always said we were going to take him to Disney. So literally this week, we're about to book our trip and spend way too much money because we
Y'all have
always
gone
said
to
we were going to
Disney
do this.
quite a few
So
times, from my understanding,
my
too.
wife and I went for our 10-year anniversary without the kids, and it was awesome. And now, but we always said we were going to take the kids. So 4 years later, we're taking the kids. It'll be great, but it's like, man, this is going to be
much
more money than
different,
it should
much
be.
different
Yeah.
experience.
A question. As an advisor, you spend a lot of time advising people, obviously. What percentage of people like really don't follow your advice? And then how long will you work with a client that will consistently be like, no, I don't want to do that? What's it
Yeah,
look like?
this is the toughest part of the profession for sure, because it almost feels like a divorce, a disagreement. There's challenges with this, and I'd say if I was to write a percentage on it, 90% of people are following our advice. It could be higher or lower, and there's different stages of life where people might take more advice versus not take more advice. So we help clients understand a lot of that, and we'll actually put in our notes how receptive they were to the advice in those meetings, and ultimately bring them back and say, hey, over the last 3 years, we've had 10 suggestions, you've only taken 2.
Oh,
Are
wow.
you really getting out of this what you want out of this? Are you enjoying this experience? What could be better? What's missing? What would help you feel more confident in making these decisions? Because I'm a person that I have a lot of faith in people. I think every relationship can be repaired. Some relationships can't, but maybe that's just me mentally convincing myself that any relationship can be repaired, and there's certainly plenty of ones that we have had that. But there have been those other times, and I call it a coming to Jesus conversation, where we start getting really specific and saying, is this the right relationship for you? Are you getting out of this what you want? Are you 100% sure you still want to work with us? Because if that's the case, this is exactly what needs to change. It's not negotiable. This is what needs to change. If it's not what you're willing to do, that is okay. I am not perfect for everybody. I want you to get strong, great advice from somebody that you are going to be able to relate to. And if that isn't me, I'm okay with that. I can put my pride aside. I am not the most important person in the world. Never will be.
Yeah.
But you need that person that's really in your corner. And so on average, if somebody's not listening to our advice for 1 to 2 years straight, that's typically where we're going to be super intentional of saying that this probably isn't the right fit. But most people know. Most people know if the relationship's gotten to that point where it's not receptive anymore. And for some folks, it's actually a breath of fresh air, knowing that you're ready to end it too, because it's not fun talking to an advisor that you dodge their calls
Right.
every
Yeah.
single year, over and over
Right.
again.
Yeah.
You want to have that advising relationship where you see their name come up on your phone. You're like, oh, sweet. What do they got for me this time?
Yeah. That's cool.
So,
I'm curious. Probably a lot of people wonder, what does the like average work week of an advisor look like? I'm assuming the buckets are. I know you meet with a lot of people, and I'm assuming there's, notes and before and after the meetings, and then there's actually like messing with everybody's money and doing all the things. So just like high level, what does the week for Brian Sytsma look like?
yeah, so high level, this radically changes depending on what tenure you are as an advisor. Because at the beginning, Dylan, I worked as many hours as existed in this world.
Yeah.
80, 90 hour, 100 weeks are just not that uncommon for a financial advisor at the beginning, because you're starting a business from scratch. You have 0 clients, 0 people. So especially at the beginning, it's 100% of the time is client acquisition. Calling people, achieving referrals, introductions, marketing your business, getting out there. It's just like any other business. People have to know that you exist to utilize your services.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we're going into year 6. I would say at this point, we're probably meeting somewhere around 14 to 18 families a week. Typically, those meetings can range anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes more or less, just depending on how complex or simple the scenario is. And then the rest of the time is a combination between I'll maybe spend an hour, hour and a half a day calling people, whether it's to schedule more meetings, to call an introduction from a client of ours. But the rest of the time, I'd say like the 3-4 hours is business strategy, whether that's evaluating client portfolios or even just trying to figure out where do we want this business to actually go. I think one of the main challenges that advisors have, and this is speaking to any other advisors that are listening to this business is so easy to plateau. It is so easy to get comfortable and start working with enough people that if you're super high growth, that all of a sudden you stop doing the simple things. Stop doing the things that got you to where you are, but also knowing what got you here will not get you to where you want to go.
All right.
And so my vision long term is if I had a high level of what I did every single day, I would love to be the face of the business. So ultimately the first person that a client meets, and then my team would take over everything else. Client and portfolio management, client acquisition, getting introductions, all those items. But as of right now, we've got a smaller team, so I'm still doing a lot of those items. And then as our team grows, I'm sure that'll change.
Yeah. Well, Brian, this has been a super interesting conversation. I think really helpful to a lot of people. So speaking of the face of the business, if people wanted to connect with you, maybe take a next step, see if you or Northwestern might be a helpful place for them as on their financial journey, where can they go?
Yeah, so one, you could either connect with myself or my team member Paige Petrino. So my email is brian.sytsma, so brian.sytsma, sytsma@nm.com. Hers is Paige, Paige .Petrino, Putrino @nm.com. Phone number is 219-742-4321. And my encouragement for you is reach out and have an introductory call, because we are going to help you understand whether or not we may be the right fit or may not be the right fit. So typically these days, Dylan, we're spending a lot of our time helping folks in the professional athletics world. Let's do a lot of work with NC State football, NFL, different organizations in that world. We work with a lot of pilots, entrepreneurs, whether solo or larger, and certainly a lot of folks in the medical and software space too. And while we do work in other occupations, sometimes we're the right fit and sometimes we aren't. Yep. So that's really the best way to connect with us. We've got an online website too. If you just search up Brian Sytsma, Northwestern Mutual, easy way to connect with us and be happy to help and see if we can lead you the right direction.
Awesome. And we will put all that in the show notes. So if you guys didn't catch all that, you can go and find the show notes and connect with Brian that way. Brian, thank you so much for the time. This is a great conversation.
Of course. Dylan, always appreciate it, man.